Hello, I'm David Hunt, CEO and founder of Hyperion Executive Search and your host for the Leading Cleantech podcast. Thanks very much for joining us again, and thank you for the feedback on the new YouTube format. If you haven't already done so, please head over to YouTube and subscribe for future episodes. We've got a great couple more before the year closes out. Today I'm talking to a serial entrepreneur and a long-time entrepreneur within the clean mobility sector. Not content with founding, scaling, and selling a company to BP for $170 million US, he's now recently launched a new business, again in EV charging infrastructure. And there's a lot that we're going to be digging into this afternoon. David Martell from EVIOS. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Hi, David. It's great to have you on the Leading Cleantech podcast.
Hi, David. Good to meet you.
So there's a lot to unpack with your background and all that's going on at the moment. Clearly, really keen to dig into the launch of the new business, EVIOS, and hear much more about how that came about. But it's always good, I think, to get a flavour for our audience, a bit of context and background, because you're a serial entrepreneur. You've obviously built, scaled, and exited businesses previously. So perhaps you can give us a little bit of a flavour of what first got you into the entrepreneurial mindset and some of the journey up until where we are at the moment with launching a new business.
Yeah, well, going back a few years, I started off as an accountant, but always interested in automotive technology. Mm-hmm. Always been keen on cars and anything that moved, really. I started a company called Trafficmaster, which some of the viewers might remember in the early 90s. It was the first telematics business in the UK.
Right.
We put sensors on all the motorway bridges in the UK, got a license from the Department of Transport, and put the first screen that was available in a car. I mean, it's a job to imagine that now, but remember going through the drama of getting consent from the Department of Transport for a screen. They said that it couldn't have more than 20 letters in it, which are far cry from the screens you get these days. So we built Trafficmaster up and floated it on the London stock market. And then I sold out in the mid-2000s and had a couple of years of really thinking, okay, what do I want to do? And recognised at that stage with the contacts we got in the motor industry that electric vehicles were coming. It was the early days of electric cars. I mean, I remember the gee whizzes around London. And a lot of people thought I was crazy that, these things are not going to catch on. But in 2008, launched Chargemaster. And we built that up over the following 10 years to have some 400 employees, have the largest public charging network in this country called Polar. Did home charging, business charging, workplace charging, operations in Europe as well. And we were going to float it on the London stock market, and I then got an offer from BP to sell.
Right.
It's always a challenge when you with an entrepreneur when you've started a business. Do you want to sell it, or do you want to? And what's the timing?
Yeah.
And I've been through this before, obviously with Trafficmaster, but in the end we decided to sell it.
Right.
So that's the background to why I got involved in electric vehicles. Had a couple of years with reviewing the market and recognised that actually the EV market was really only in its infancy still.
Right.
Obviously moving towards 2030 when all cars in the UK and most of Europe are going to have to be electric. So we decided to start again. And so I started EVIOS with some of my ex-Chargemaster colleagues. And we launched the product in April this year, and it's gone very well.
Yeah, and I was at the launch. It was great to see, and we'll move into that. There's so much to unpack there. As an entrepreneur, you touched on there, I should say, that we all have different aspirations as to whether we'll float, whether we will obviously be acquired, whether we'll become a unicorn, all these kinds of things as a founder, or whether you would just survive, obviously, in the first couple of years. And it's interesting that you've obviously had both of those scenarios in terms of both selling and floating. But even more so, going back to 2008, starting an EV charging infrastructure business. I remember 2007, I think I mentioned before, when I launched a solar business, because no roofs had solar at that point, and even my friends laughed at me, thought I was an idiot. Going back to the point, in anywhere, even in major cities like London, the number of electric vehicles back at that time, as you say, a handful of gee whizzes was not much around. So what gave you the confidence to think, actually, we are at the start of something? Because it's easy when you start to see some of the tipping points coming, as they are obviously, well, they're well past now, but you were very early to the marketplace.
Yeah, I think I could see the electrification was coming. As I say, with Trafficmaster, we had a lot of contacts. We were working with a large number of OEMs. Talking to them, I was convinced electric vehicles were coming. Very difficult as an entrepreneur to start a business actually building cars. Obviously, a very small number of people are very successful. Obviously, Elon Musk is the key role model there. But there's plenty of other people that have failed, as I'm sure we don't need to go into now. But I'm sure that plenty of people have aspirations for building electric vehicles and didn't realise it's actually a lot tougher than one might imagine. But having been involved in infrastructure with Trafficmaster, I could see that there was going to be a market for charging points, and we knew quite a lot about it. Mm-hmm. We knew how to build infrastructure, we knew how to build electronics, and it was something that I thought had got a sensible amount of capital that was needed. So it was a purely pragmatic business decision that went into electric vehicle charging. And I could see actually there was an opportunity to grow into scale in that area.
So early days though, that must have been challenging. Because like you say, you can see the longer term goal, but in the first instance, you've got to build a team, you've got to build product, you've got to build infrastructure when there are limited customers at that time compared to obviously where we are now and have been for a few years now at least. So how did you cope with those challenges of creating a business and obviously the costs involved in that to start with when there was clearly going to be a lag before customers caught up, so to speak?
Well, obviously, but my experience over the years has shown that when you start a business, you need to think how much capital do you need, and then probably multiply it by a factor of 10 at least. One of the key failures of most businesses is not having enough capital. Mm-hmm. I was fortunate that I came out of Trafficmaster with a nice amount of equity, a nice amount of capital to invest in a new business. So we largely financed it ourselves from beginning. Then I went out and actually raised some capital from basically angels and people I knew who did actually very, very well out of Chargemaster. Pulling together the technology, having the vision, as long as you are focused in what you're doing and don't stray from that vision, I find that's relatively easy.
Okay, but still building a team and the culture. Actually, having done it before, I guess it's always easier the second time. Well, to some extent, it's easier the second time around, particularly if you can draw some of those people from that business. And then, how long was Chargemaster running before before the BP acquisition?
10 years, right. Just over 10 years. And the market, obviously, I can remember. In that 10 years, we went through various milestones. Obviously, the Nissan Leaf came out. Renault had a range of EVs. One of the challenge when we went out to start to raise money from outside, one of the biggest challenges was actually convincing people that EVs were going to happen. You don't have that problem now. It's almost the opposite. People get carried away with enthusiasm. Yeah. But I think one of the things you've got to demonstrate is you've got a very clear vision. You're focused on what the market is, recognizing that it's going to normally take a little bit longer than you thought, but we were realistic with our forecast. We were focused on profitability. I think one of the failings of many companies these days is they go for growth at the expense of recognizing at the end of the day you've got to show that you can be profitable, and also obviously keeping an eye on cash. No company has gone bust because it's losing money. It goes bust because it runs out of cash.
Yeah. And that's one of the thought processes at the moment, because there is so much cash, dry powder in the investment markets. There's so much, obviously, recognition that the electrification of transport is now a done deal. It's just obviously the speed of rollout. So, I guess when there's all that going on, there is this land grab kind of mentality with a lot of organizations, both CPOs and right the way across the market. So from what you're saying, it's a case of don't focus necessarily immediately on growth, but make sure from day one you can pay the bills, essentially.
Yeah, make sure you need you've got the capital you need, and make sure you don't try to do everything. I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about EVIOS in a few minutes, but when we decided to get back into the marketplace, we thought, okay, we're not going to be doing everything. We're not going to be doing a charging network. We're not going to be doing DC charging and so on. We're going to focus on an area of the market we think is the most attractive.
Yeah. Let's dig into that now, because again, it's interesting that you created, one of the UK's, if not biggest, CPOs or charge point operators with destination home charging, work charging, etc. And you've come back into the marketplace as a product manufacturer with an EV charging product for the home marketplace. So it'd be good to look at why you've moved into, or you chose a hardware. I know it's obviously software, and we can talk about exactly the product, but sort of a product-oriented background rather than a pure operations network. And then obviously into home charging, particularly where there's a lot of us, we touched on before, sort of focus on rapid charging and DC. So again, just to get your thought processes into why equipment and why specifically home charging.
Well, it comes through experience of driving an EV. I mean, I've driven over... In the last 10 years, I've driven over 250,000 miles in electric vehicles and know quite a lot about the experience. And the one thing you learn is that actually driving an EV, living with an EV, is very different from a combustion engine car. There's far too much focus on public charging, the CPOs and so on. And concerns about, are there going to be enough? Of course, there'll be enough. 120 years ago, I'm sure there were concerns about, are there going to be enough petrol stations around? And of course, market forces mean that these come along. And every filling station and every motorway service areas will have a whole bank of chargers, have no doubt about it. But people won't normally use them. You only use them for emergency because you want to charge where you are. And the beauty about charging an electric car at home is that most people tend to go home and go to bed. And they're often in bed for, at home in the evening for, at least 12 hours, if you're lucky. And that's an ideal time to charge your electric car. Same thing as a mobile phone. And that dawned on me that, it was obvious that the best place to charge your car is at home. And that's also the most interesting place to build a business because you can build unique products that serve particular areas of the marketplace, and it will become a huge business. I mean, there's some 20-odd million homes in the UK that have got the appropriate parking for charging points. There's currently only about 300,000 home charging units in the UK. So it's going to go from 300,000 to 20 million in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
So that's a great market opportunity. We don't believe, I personally, with my experience, don't believe it's going to be very easy to make money out of being a CPO in the coming future, because obviously you get the big guys, we sold our business to BP, as you know. Shell are heavily into to public charging points, energy companies, people like EDF and so on. You can't, and they're often doing it not necessarily to make money. And I always think it's a mug's game to go into a business where other people are in it not necessarily to make money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, we've seen a lot of acquisitions of companies. Obviously, you're owned to BP, EVBox to Shell, EVBox to Engie, New Motion to Shell, and all these kinds of things. So it's certainly an interesting and a challenging and a global marketplace. Looking back at home charging, you're right, because again, when people ask me how often do I charge or how do I ever worry about range or anxiety, all this kind of stuff, I'm like, well, no, I normally charge once or twice a month at home because I don't tend to drive too many miles, but always at home unless I'm on a really long journey, in which case you find a charger, a fast charger. The point is interesting. You talked about the scale of the market, because obviously EV charging, there are a lot of manufacturers clearly of home charging equipment, some around longer than others. So there's obviously an aspect of potential commoditization and consolidation within the charging marketplaces. What are your thoughts in terms of to again, scale rapidly and then potentially again an exit down the line? You've already made one acquisition, which we can talk about in a moment. Do you see that you're in a position, or hopefully we'll be in a position to be the acquirer in some of this consolidation? Because you've recently acquired Andersen out of administration, right?
Well, we're not. I think these things evolve. We didn't go out to seek acquisitions in the first period of the company. Andersen, we recognised was an interesting area of the market. It was an area of the market that we weren't in. Mm-hmm. It's a designer sector of the market where you've got an relatively expensive charging point blending in with your house. So it has some 90 odd different variants that you can specify in the same way when you buy a new BMW or Range Rover, you can specify the leather, the audio, all sorts of things. And with the Andersen product, you can specify the design of it with a wooden fascia or a high-tech fascia and so on. And it's got a sector of the market that we weren't in. It became available. It went into administration largely because they simply ran out of cash. It goes back to the story that I started off telling a few minutes ago, that they were a young business that had a lot going for it, but they simply hadn't got enough cash to see it through. And we managed to acquire it. We didn't need to take over the headquarters, didn't need to take over a lot of the staff because we had an existing customer service, installation teams and so on. Mm-hmm. So immediately we took £250,000 a month out of the overheads, which made it into a viable business. So we've now got a high-tech product in EVIOS, which is a product that works for single users, multiple users with a 4-digit PIN access control, 3 ways of charging your car as quickly as possible on a nighttime rate or through solar energy. Very advanced, probably the most advanced charging point in the market. And in parallel to that, we've got a separate brand, Andersen, that caters for the luxury end of the market. And we've already got relationships with Jaguar, Land Rover and Porsche, mm-hmm. and in negotiation with a number of other luxury car manufacturers to have something that actually is stylish, might cost £200 or £300 more than others, but it fits in with the style of your house.
Yeah. No, it is a great offering. And again, at the moment, it's to recognise that there is still probably a bias towards the luxury end of the market with EVs as the sort of the lower, more affordable end catches up. So clearly there's a big market there for the Andersen product. And I noted some time ago when they had the relationship with Porsche and looked at the units myself. Another interesting thing, and again, I know our audience is relatively savvy in all of these things, but just looking at, again, externally, you look at the myths that everybody goes home, plugs the car in, and the grid sort of suffers at 6:30 when we're all trying to cook our tea kind of thing. So go back to the sort of the functionality of the EVIOS product and the smartness of it and the programmability, because at the moment, there's an awful lot of people with the energy crisis that's going on, much more acutely aware of their energy consumption at home. So again, perhaps you can share some of the smarter aspects of the EVIOS product.
Yeah, indeed. Well, you're probably aware that by law, you can't sell a product that doesn't have the ability to schedule your charging. And we've taken that one stage further, that when you buy the EVIOS home charger, you can simply select the electricity provider that you're signed up with, and it'll automatically show the tariff. And if you've got a low cost tariff at, say, midnight till 5 o'clock in the morning, it will charge using that primarily, that rate charge. Makes a huge difference. Often you can charge, the cost will be maybe 5p, 7p a kilowatt hour, compared with, the going rate, as you know, is about 30 pence or more for home charging, and obviously over double or sometimes treble that for rapid charging. So you can charge your car, and I'm sure there's going to be more and more focus on this going forward, mm-hmm. that actually using your home charger at times when there's plenty of electricity. And as we move to more and more to renewable electricity, that will become more acute. Using wind and other forms of renewable electricity, there's plenty of electricity, generally speaking, in the early hours of the morning. And that's an ideal time to charge your car. Mm-hmm. So and the difference is huge. I always make the point that people, particularly people like taxi drivers and other people who are very conscious of the cost of running their combustion engine car, will drive out of their way to save tuppence a litre on diesel or petrol. And that's relatively small saving. But with electricity, if you use it smartly, you can halve or go to a quarter of the normal cost. So it means that you can you can run your electric car very, very cost effectively. And as we move to the situation over the next 7 or 8 years, everybody's driving electric vehicles. This will become much more of a high profile experience. People will, you can literally save hundreds, if not thousands of pounds a year by using electricity that's generating at times that you choose to charge at.
Yeah, I think it's the question I get asked most when driving. I got a Polestar 2, and the obviously a few questions around, well, why is it not seen that before? But most of it's around how much does that cost to charge, or how much does that cost a tank, so to speak, equivalent. People are, because of the energy crisis, actually much more conscious of that, and I think that will continue, certainly, as you say. It's relatively early doors for EVIOS. I think I was at the launch, or certainly one of the earlier launches at Fully Charged in Farnborough back in April. So I think it was around about that time that you launched. What's the sort of scale of the business in terms of headcount? How are things progressing? What are the aspirations for the next couple of years for the business?
Yeah, we're based in Bedfordshire, midway between Bedford and Milton Keynes, a brand new facility. We have a factory where we do our own assembly. The whole product, or both products, Andersen and EVIOS 1, are made in the UK using UK source components. We have a staff now of so it's growing every week, but it's something between 35 and 40 at the moment.
Right.
We, with my accounting background, we're very focused on controlling costs. We do often. We're very surprised sometimes when we see the number of people employed in some of the other companies that we compete against. But we automate and we use technology very wisely. We do our own installations. We've got a fleet of electricians that install the units around the country. I think we're the only company that uses pure electric vehicles to do that. We look at renewable focus all the way through the business.
Yeah.
So we're growing. It's gone. We're ahead of budget in terms of sales.
Okay.
The market is growing, as I mentioned. Every new home in the UK has to have a charging point. We see as every new car will be electric within the next few years. We see the market growing to something from currently about 150,000 units a year to something 10 times that figure over the next 5 years.
Yeah.
So it always helps. From my business background, I always look, it helps. You might have the best mousetrap in the business, but it helps if the market for mousetraps is growing a factor of tenfold over the next few years.
Yeah. It's interesting when you touch on there, because again, it's always tempting because the market is growing exponentially globally, or certainly across North America and all of the European region. A lot of businesses, I think, expand internationally too soon, and there's always that balance between, do you wait and therefore perhaps miss an opportunity? Do you go too early and then potentially, obviously, incur too many costs and struggle to stretch yourself too thinly? Do you have, for EVIOS, aspirations to move outside of the UK market, which, as you've said already, has huge scope for growth? But what's your thoughts on broader internationalization or expansion of the business? Well,
the UK market is huge by itself. In normal times, about 2 million cars a year are sold in the UK. Mm-hmm. Appreciate it's been distorted a little bit over the last couple of years. We've got experience of selling charging points in Europe with Chargemaster. We used to sell to many European countries at that time. In Traffic Master, we had experience of selling globally. So I know it's a matter of waiting for the right time.
Right.
There are technological differences. As you might be aware, the UK market has gone its own way through government regulation in terms of some of the aspects of the charging points that's required. So actually many European competitors can't economically come to the UK. And that applies to obviously other suppliers in places like China. So we've got a good position in the UK, but it is our intention to sell into mainland Europe during the course of next year.
Yeah. I think, again, I've spoken to many manufacturers who've stumbled across that. You'd think it would be better research, but often going into new territories and then realizing actually they don't have regulatory approval, or there are some nuances that mean that they can't actually operate or connect in those countries just yet. And that always...
Yeah, it's not only the regulatory changes, it's the market changes. I mean, for instance, some markets such as French, it's pretty difficult to sell into France if you're not French. And obviously, other markets might look very attractive, but there are often challenges. And, there's always costs. Our view is to, particularly in the current financial markets, we're not very far off being profitable now, but our strategy is to be profitable by next summer,
right,
and cash generative. And when you're in that position, you can afford to take a bit more risk. Obviously, with the fairly uncertain capital markets at the moment, it's fairly foolish to go out spending a lot of money to when you don't know when what the situation will be when you need to raise more funds.
Yeah. I guess talking a little bit about your experiences as an entrepreneur now, because your first company you floated, which clearly comes with many challenges. The second, you've been through an M&A, which again is not without its hard work and challenges. When you set out those businesses, did you have that as a specific exit route, or did they evolve as you grew the businesses? Just thinking as an entrepreneur, when you started the businesses, did you have a clear vision of exit, or was the case of if we make it well, then the good things will come?
In my experience, you can't double guess what opportunity is going to come your way. It's a bit like Andersen opportunity came our way, and we acted, and we actually completed the deal within 10 days of finding out about it.
Right.
We were able to move very, very quickly. With the argument about what do you float or do you sell is always an interesting one. I've been involved in both routes. Running a public company it enables you to normally raise the capital you need to expand, but you've got to answer to the market. So the markets sometimes are very unpredictable, and your share price might crash through no fault of your own. So I'm, and obviously the other point with an IPO is you don't necessarily have the ability to exit as a CEO, because if you're running a public company, you start selling the shares of the company, obviously it gives the wrong message to the market as a whole.
Yeah. And obviously, just jumping aside, so I want to talk about the exit through acquisition, but equally last year or last sort of 18 months or so, we saw a lot of people who, including EV charging infrastructure companies, who were drawn to the SPAC marketplace. And we saw obviously, fairly catastrophic results for a lot of those companies that went down that route, which picks up on your point of that, the volatility of the public markets.
Yeah. And there's another, charge point provider floated on the London market last year. And their share prices, is now less than around a quarter of where it was when at the flotation. So it's not an easy route to go. It might seem, and of course, it's quite an expensive thing to do.
Yeah.
With Chargemaster, we'd appointed advisors to go to a float in 2018, and we'd got financial PR, we got lawyers, we got accountants. We've got stockbrokers, and we got our presentation all together, and we were on a trajectory to float. Somehow or other, there was a leak, which is often can be the situation. Maybe one of your advisors or an unsuccessful advisor leaked our whole presentation to Sky News, which actually gave us a favour, did us a favour, because I was very surprised to see all this detail in the media. But we had a contact from BP within 10 days. They said, do we want to consider a trade sale? I said, obviously, it depends on the price. And we carried on both routes for a period of 5 or 6 weeks to make sure that the trade sale wasn't going to disappear or become unattractive for any reason. before giving up the option of floating on the stock market. In reality, I think it probably was the right decision. All our shareholders did very nicely out of it. Mm-hmm. I was at an event last week when happened to bump into one of our shareholders in Chargemaster, who told me that two of his sons have managed to buy their own houses from the proceeds of what they made out of the deal, and that obviously gives one a little bit of satisfaction that other people have done well out of it as well.
Yeah, indeed. And going back to your point, as you say, you have to be careful as the CEO of a public company in terms of your actions and how long you hang around for. But the same applies with the trade sale. Normally there's some form of earnout, and that's not always easy for people who, again, just have this fairly utopian vision that you'll sell a company and ride off into the sunset, go buy yourself a yacht. But regardless of the sum involved, it's not that straightforward, right? Although I'm not saying your yacht.
It comes down to negotiation, and I'm, always, obviously, with a bit of experience, I always like to think that I can negotiate a pretty good deal. But we didn't have any earnout at all. That was fundamental. That management, because I wasn't the only shareholder in the management team, but we all said, look, we're going to have to be treated exactly the same as anybody else. I did have a non-compete point of view, and I was asked to stay on for 3 years to run the business, but after a year, I realised that working for a multinational conglomerate wasn't really the kind of thing that I enjoyed doing.
Your cup of tea, indeed. So again, starting EVIOS with some of the obviously experienced people and leadership team that you've worked with or had working with you in the past, it always helps. Again, don't want to focus too much on the financials, but did you go for fundraising externally or purely within your own assets, so to speak?
Well, it's interesting actually, because we had obviously capital that we were fortunate. Chargemaster was sold for around 130 million. I didn't own 100%, certainly, but I did own close to 30% of it. So I had certainly capital to put into a new business myself, even after paying tax. But we did all the development using our own resources at EVIOS. After the launch event in April, and that you mentioned, I think you kindly came onto our stand at Fully Charged Live. We also had a launch event at the Gherkin, which went very successful. We had 60 or 70 trade friends and family, guests, government, and so on. And it raised the profile of the product, and people recognised that this was a very exciting new product in the marketplace. We used the opportunity to go out, and I set out to raise actually 3 million to increase our liquidity.
Yeah.
And we eventually raised 5.8 million and turned away several £1 million more than that at what we thought was a very good, from our point of view, valuation, a good valuation, I think, all the way around.
Yeah.
So we did raise the capital, and indeed, so we're sitting on more capital now than we probably need. But if opportunities come along, that's always useful.
Yeah.
I had a close friend who was in the venture capital business. He was actually an investor in Trafficmaster. Always advised me that if capital is available to you at the right valuation, even if you're not sure whether you need it or, take it. And that's always a great motto. With any young business, you're almost certainly going to need more capital than you originally thought.
Yeah, I think there is that underestimation. Then there's the fact that when you need it, it's always hard to come by.
Well, of course, yeah, it's like anything. If you need it, you need it quickly, and that's the last time. That's not easily to raise external capital in normal events takes at least 6 months. It's a huge distraction. We were very lucky, actually. In May and June, we raised that 5.8 million in less than 6 weeks, largely through people who had already made money out of the Chargemaster business.
Yeah, it certainly helps having that successful track record to that you've been able to do things successfully in the past. And touch on that, because as I say, you're in the industry very early. You've seen an awful lot change in the last 10, 12 years in and around the mobility transition, the clean energy transition. Just some headline thoughts as to how you see the next four or 5 years evolving in electrification, perhaps beyond. Obviously, I appreciate obviously the focus on EVIOS is on the home charging market, but more broadly in terms of the electrification of transport, bigger transport, government policy, all these kind of things. Where do you see, or what would you like to see happening in the next 4 or 5 years to really support this transition?
Well, I think it's going to be a very exciting time. I think it's the biggest change in automotive technology there's been probably ever, because every single car manufacturer and indeed increasingly truck manufacturers are going towards electrification. I mean, you don't see anybody investing in a new internal combustion engine factory, do you? They're all investing in electrification. It's complete focus, which means that, I mean, I always make the point that the automotive industry is very much like an oil tanker. In fact, it takes a long time to change direction into a particular technology, but once it's changed, it's set on that course. And we're seeing that at the moment with the automobile industry. Huge investment in electrification, huge changes. I mean, there's going to be more and more. It's really impressive for some of the Chinese manufacturers that are coming into Europe. Is really shaking it, and is also impressive the quality of the vehicles that they're bringing in.
Absolutely,
you've probably seen the market share that people like MG, Shanghai Automotive have got in the UK because they're producing a very good car,
really good quality car,
at a very good price, and that's going to be. And there's obviously new startup manufacturers as well. So really, really exciting time, and the cars actually are bloody good. I mean, I still get a huge kick out of driving EVs. The performance is great; they're so smooth. You've got, as you know, you've got luxury manufacturers going that route. Rolls-Royce recently announced their flagship electric vehicle. You equate. You think of Rolls-Royce and you think a smooth V12 or something like that, but there's nothing smoother than an electric motor. Absolutely. Very, very exciting times. It really is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Go back to on a personal front, David. What have been some of the key highlights or bits of the journey that you've had across the businesses we've talked about, and in terms of launching EVIOS most recently, that have been the most rewarding and the most challenging?
Well, I get a lot of satisfaction for growing something from a small scale. Yeah. It really is, to see it work. It can have its frustrations. There's always going to be bumps in the road. Mm-hmm. It can be very, very frustrating if things don't go quite the way you want it. But I think that the important thing is to have a plan, stick to it, be focused, and be passionate about it. Anybody that starts a business in an area that haven't got an interest is a fool, because you're going to have challenges. Unless you really enjoy it, you'll give up. Now, I've been very fortunate through my business career that I've had 3 businesses that I've been passionate about, have been successful. Inevitably it requires long hours and hard work, and that's a given. You can't. You need a degree of luck as it goes along. You need capital. As I mentioned 2 or 3 times. You see so many people start a business without enough capital, and you think, just don't do it. You won't get there. It's very difficult to. You've got to have sufficient vision and compulsion to make it work, and determination. Yeah. So obviously when you sell a business like we did with Chargemaster to BP, we had quite a number of staff that got options. So they did very nicely out of it. I think there were about 20 people within the team who came out of it with a fairly substantial amount of money. We had another 60 shareholders that, many of which I knew personally, maybe half of them I knew personally, and many of them did very nicely out of it. So that gives a degree of satisfaction. It also gives, obviously, yourself personally and your family some security that you've got a few quid in the bank.
Yeah, all these things.
So yeah, it's been a fun journey, and I'm really looking forward to the next chapter as it goes on.
Yeah, no, still plenty to do. And finally, just you touched on there the importance of passion. Has there been any particular, I don't know, person or instance or book that ignited your passion for entrepreneurship and for the mobility transition in particular?
Not really that I can put my finger on. Obviously, one has to, if you're in this industry, you have to respect what Elon Musk has done with Tesla. I mean, I got a good friend who 6 years ago, we had a wager for, I think it was only £20, but the amount probably doesn't matter, that Tesla would go bust within by 2020, and I was very glad that he bought me a meal for the winnings last year. But no, you have to respect what has been done there, because I think there are plenty of people that said that couldn't happen. But I love looking at people that achieve things, particularly in the the engineering world. Go back at people like Brunel, the things that he did from an engineering point of view. It was a different era, clearly, but I often wonder what he would have done if he'd been around these days in the electric vehicle area. I'm sure he would have come up with something very, very interesting.
Indeed, yeah, no, absolutely. Listen, David, it's been fantastic to spend some time with you. All power to the new enterprise. Look forward to seeing how EVIOS and Andersen continue to evolve in the market in the UK and beyond. To everybody else, thanks very much for joining us on the Leads in Cleantech podcast. It's great to have you with us. Please do visit the YouTube channel and subscribe, or indeed Apple or wherever you listen to your podcast, go ahead and subscribe for future guests. We'll make sure that we point on the episode pages to EVIOS and to all the various social media platforms for you to do some more research into the journey that David's been through and the journey that he's currently on with EVIOS. But in the meantime, thanks very much for joining us on Leads in Cleantech.